So going back to English, our main language today. So I want to welcome you all again, all our panelists and attendees joining us. My name is Carolina Rossini, and I'm the co-founder, I'm the founding CEO of Portulans Institute, which is a non-profit think tank based in DC with collaborators based in Geneva and Toronto. We are a young organization founded at the end of 2019, and our mission includes informing stakeholders by producing independent, rigorous metrics and database research, such as the NRI. You can learn more about us at portulansinstitute.org. Today, it's an honor to host this regional event, which is part of a series of regional events discussing digital transformation and network readiness. And I'm very honored to have partnered with UNESCO and Cetic.Br in Brazil to make this event possible. So thank you so much to our partners. Our 2-hour event program is divided into 2 segments. In the first segment, we're gonna focus on a dialogue on digital transformation with all our panelists this afternoon. Focusing on the region digital progress and how we can build forward better in a COVID and post-COVID world. And during the second segment, my colleague and co-founder Sumitra Dutta, who is the president of Portulans Institute, will present the recently released Network Readiness Index for Latin America. And then we're gonna follow that with a discussion with the panelists from the first segment. So again, if you prefer Portuguese or Spanish, please choose your translation channel, clicking the little globe called interpretation in Zoom. So some additional housekeepings. I want to first thank to STL, who is our corporate partner for NRI, for the NRI 2020. And we all will have our opportunity for a Q&A today in both segments, of course, depending on time. And I encourage you all to send your questions in the chat. You are encouraged to identify yourself if you wish so, and also the speaker you are sending your question to. Finally, I also encourage you to share your thoughts in social media. We are using the hashtag NRI 2020 and also the hashtag digital transformation. Please, I encourage the panelists to mute yourselves. And if you want, you can also close your camera while the other speakers speak, but that's up to you. So going to our panelist introductions right now, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. First, my dear friend and a person that I admire for many years, Alexandre Barbosa, who has over 10 years, who for over 10 years served as the head of the Regional Center for Studies on the Development for the Information Society based in São Paulo, Cetic and NIC.br. Alexandre is in charge of several nationwide ICT survey projects in Brazil that aim to produce statistics and indicators for informing policy and research. Prior to working at Cetic.Br and NIC.br, he worked as a leading private sector consultant on ICT development, including e-government and programs. I think a lot of what we do today, including at Portulans, would not be possible without all the work NIC, Cetic.Br do in Brazil specifically. Lidia Brito from UNESCO. She is the director of UNESCO Regional Office for Science in Latin America and the Caribbean, and she serves as UNESCO representative in Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Lidia was formerly the Director for Science, Policy and Sustainable Development at UNESCO and has over 30 years of experience advancing science and tech for sustainable development and building linkages between scientific progress and wild society. Professor Lourdes Casanova is a senior lecturer and director of the Emerging Markets Institute at the School of Management at Cornell University and was formerly at INSEAD. In 2017, Lourdes was awarded one of the 30 most influential Ibero-American women intellectuals by S Global. She has served as a member of the Latin American Global Agenda Council and Competitiveness in Latin America task forces at the World Economic Forum and publishes widely on the subject of competitiveness and economic development in Latin America. Thank you, Lourdes. It's wonderful to have you join us today. Professor Sumitra Dutta. He's the co-founder and president of Portulans Institute, and he's also a professor of management and former founding dean at the College of Business at Cornell University. Prior to joining Cornell, Soumitra was a faculty at INSEAD. Soumitra is a global thought leader in digital readiness and transformation and has co-authored the Network Readiness Index for several years. And in addition to being the founder and co-editor of the Global Innovation Index published with the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO. Diego Molano is a former Minister for Information Technologies and Communications of Colombia and led the transformation of Colombia's digital landscape with the Vive Digital plan, which aims to reduce poverty and creates jobs using tech. Diego also sits on the Portulans board, has a advisor, and is leading an international consultant on digital transformation for companies and governments. Currently, Diego is a senior advisor for the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB, the OECD, and McKinsey. So thank you, Diego. It's always wonderful to have you and your energy. And Dr. Sebastian Rovira is an Economic Affairs Officer and the officer in charge of the Innovation and New Technologies Unity in the Division of Production, Productivity, and Management at the UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. Sebastian is responsible for projects in the vision related to the dynamics of innovation and tech capacity. And in recent years, has developed a series of cutting-edge studies on innovation in Latin America. So as you all can see, watching us today, we have an incredible lineup of panelists for our panel today. So, so let's just jump into our panel, and I would like to ask all the attendees, if you have questions, to please use the Q&A function of Zoom, not just the chat, please. Okay, so I'm sure everybody's very excited to start today, so let's begin. Please do keep your comments to 3-4 minutes, so we really ensure some dynamic dialogue, and I would like to start with Alexandre. Alexandre, the COVID pandemic has really illustrated to us the importance of accurate, unbiased data that can inform an effective policy response. Can you share any best practices based on how Cetic.Br collect data on digital transformation? You're mute.
Sorry, now it's okay, huh? Thank you very much, Carol, and good afternoon to everyone. It is indeed a great pleasure for me to be here in this panel today, in this regional launch of the NRI. We participated also in the global launch. And Carol, I have to congratulate you and all the team involved in the NRI. It is indeed a very, very important index. And as you know, you mentioned already, for us here at NIC.br and of course Cetic, measurement and statistical data production are very important activities that we do. So you can imagine how much we value all the great work that your organization is doing around the NRI. And let me start by saying that we all know that digital transformation is taking place everywhere in the world, and Latin America is not an exception. And the COVID-19 pandemic, in a way, I would say, has accelerated the transformation process because it has forced us to look at digital. So when we see the increasing numbers of companies, even very small business that started to operate online, or the growth of internet traffic at unprecedented rates, teleworking, teleeducation, and so many other activities, all this is changing the digital landscape very rapidly. And if you look at Latin America, I would say that despite having the highest level of inequality, some countries in the region are seeking to implement public policies to promote sustainable economic growth and to promote well-being. But definitely, the digital transformation is not happening in the same way to all countries in the region. So when if you take a look at what's going on in countries such as Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, and Argentina, those countries with a large population, the digital inequalities in these countries reflect the existing socioeconomic disparities. So the real issue here is how to develop evidence-based policies in which digital technologies are at the core and of course, capable of effectively promoting inclusive digital transformation. In this context, and particularly the question you refer in the context of COVID-19, the production of timely and reliable data and statistics to measure and to understand the situation in our countries are really crucial. And this means that to address inequalities and to ensure that digital transformation is inclusive, it is necessary to have data. We all know that without data, any issues related to inequalities or digital exclusion become invisible. And of course, that without visibility, policymakers may not include these issues in the political agenda. So in my opinion, we need to produce more data that can drive policies. And data and statistics go hand in hand with the digital era that NRI is trying to portray. So this is very important. And I would say that data is the key ingredient to successfully design policies that will, at the end of the day, support an equitable and sustainable digital transformation in the region. In this regard, Cetic has the mission of producing accurate, unbiased, and timely data that can inform policymakers to an effective policy response. And the data that we produce here at Cetic and NIC.br is used in the design and monitor of public policies. And we also strive to contribute to the debate at the regional level around the role of the digital technologies by engaging key stakeholders, not only from Brazil, but from the whole region, Latin America and the Caribbean, in the data production process. So just to reply what you asked me about the Cetic's best practice, it is important to highlight the fact that we have recently created a laboratory of methodological innovation that seeks to leverage new data collection methods and new data sources such as big data. We have seen this during this COVID pandemics. We are doing that including with UNICLAC, CEPAL for digital economy. So this is very important. And we have also developed an end-to-end quality approach to this process. And this process is supported by a multi-stakeholder group of experts that provides legitimacy and enhanced transparency of the whole data production process here in Cetic. And finally, I would like to conclude by saying that the COVID-19 pandemic has really highlighted the importance of accurate, timely, and unbiased data that can drive effective policy responses. And from my perspective, and I would say that from Cetic's perspective, this multi-stakeholder approach in the data production process is absolutely fundamental. So this is more or less what I consider best practice from our side in terms of data production, especially in these difficult times. Thank you for your question, Carol.
Thank you so much, Alexandre. That was incredible, and I couldn't agree more. And I gonna quote you forever. I loved your quote on without data, problems become invisible, which means that people become invisible. So I really thank you for that contribution and all the work you do in Cetic and NIC. So moving to Professor Lourdes Casanova now, it's already clear that the pandemic has exacerbated inequalities. We see that even with schools being connected in lots of areas, kids might not be connected at home, right? For example, even in Latin America, most digitally ready countries like Brazil and Chile. So how can we leverage digital transformation to fight against those inequalities and the digital divide in a post-COVID world?
Thank you, Carolina. A pleasure being here with colleagues and friends talking about the need for digitalization in Latin America. And we have a former minister who fought a lot during his mandate as minister in this regard. So I'm looking forward to hearing his suggestions. Definitely the pandemic has been, so Latin America has been one of the regions that is suffering the most because of number of cases. Now they are not among the 5 biggest countries with the most cases, not because the cases have gone down, but because others have gone up. So definitely very difficult. And then with tremendous consequences related to poverty. So Latin America was doing quite well in terms of poverty in the first decenny of this millennium, but then, and right now, the forecast of ECLAC are really not good. So they say that the number of poor will increase from 180 million to 120 billion. There are forecasts that are saying that 13 years the region will go back in terms of GDP per capita, and that the Sustainable Development Goals obviously won't be able to reach them, so which is not very good news. And let's remember that the debt crisis of the 1980s represented 25 years of loss in terms of GDP per capita. So also what is happening right now is that who is going to help? In the 2008 financial crisis, global financial crisis, China did not blink. China continued to grow 10, 11, 12% during those years. So then pulled Latin America, imported a lot of the natural resources from Latin America. So, however, this time, yes, China is recovering, and China is increasing imports already from Brazil, for instance, both in absolute and in relative terms, but not enough to pull the region like before. This is good news and bad news. The good news is that, yes, so the bad news is that China won't be able to pull probably Latin America like it did before. But then what we can see is that the solution has to come from within. And we have many countries, and Colombia, for instance, is an example, that the central banks are doing quantitative easing, Chile as well. So it's unorthodox measures to pull the region out of the crisis. At the same time, digitalization represents an opportunity, because digitalization reduces the cost of, for instance, in medicine, in public health. When you have telemedicine, you can provide consultations at a much cheaper price. Also, digitalization in schools somehow provides that you may have the same type of quality of education, because you can use it as Zoom and other technologies to educate children in very rural areas and very difficult. So I would say that the numbers are not positive for Latin America in terms of poverty, in terms of divides within societies, within countries, but then at the same time, we have to take digital opportunities as they come, and provide, use this as a platform to jump ahead. We have said it so many times, let's try again to jump ahead and solve these tremendous social problems that the region has. Thank you, Carolina.
Muchas gracias, Lourdes. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry for how bright my image is. It's very bright here in Washington, D.C. right now, but I hope you can see me well. So, Diego, coming to you at this time, so I would love to highlight the experience you have creating Colombia Digital Plan some years ago that, of course, you keep working on, and I know you keep working so much back in your country to ensure it benefits from all the digital transformation from all the opportunities digital transformation brings. So this crisis has definitely put digital strategies under stress. But on the other hand, the crisis has underlined the importance of digital readiness, right? As we've been discussing and as Lourdes has pointed in her comments. So in your opinion, what are the key elements of a national strategy for digital transformation presently?
I think we have to understand what the urgent elements are, and let me elaborate a little bit on what Lourdes said, and take the example of education that she talked about. In Latin America, about 70% of people are already connected to internet. That's a very good news. That's a very good news. But then, when you go a little bit deeper on that number, is on what quality of connections do they have? So 70 people are connected, but they are well connected to face the reality, to face the challenges that we have in this digital economy, to face the pandemic. And then, so you go to a family in a rural area, 70% of those families don't even have a computer. And you go to urban areas in Latin America, and you take homes with kids, more than 50% don't have computers. So you ask people, hey, are you connected? Yes, I am, using a smartphone with a prepaid plan. Is that good enough for what Lourdes was talking about? Is good enough to be educated? So what we are seeing now is new gaps, new challenges that we have, because we have to align all the elements of the value chain. We have to have good internet access, like Uruguay is doing, deploying fiber optics to homes massively. Secondly, we have to have internal infrastructure at homes so that people have good Wi-Fi, good computers. Thirdly, we have to have also the institutions changed. So the schools, they have to count with the right platforms. And then a new challenge comes, which is, are the teachers ready for this? And the big answer is no. That gap grows and grows. And then again, once you have everything, you have the connection, the computer, the school ready with the platforms, the teacher is ready, is the student and his or her family ready to learn remotely? So and that's an example of education. When you take the Network Readiness Index numbers, and I encourage you guys to download the numbers, the Excel file, and congratulations that it is the data is available for everybody to use. You see that the infrastructure gap is not as bad as the use of technology. And so the shortest gap is infrastructure. The second one is the use of citizens. The next one is the use of governments. The next one is the use of business. Be careful on that. Businesses in Latin America are not being transformed. And the next one, which is the largest gap, is education. Education. People do not have the IT skills to do this. And a big problem here is that the education system is not producing people with these new skills. That's a huge issue. And so in terms of policy, we have to focus on all of them and to close all of them. But my concern is that we are walking towards the cliff. Because with bad educations, we are not getting the good jobs. And what it is happening today in Latin America, we saw it last week in Chile, we saw it the week before in Bolivia, we saw it in the elections, we saw it last week in Colombia with the protests of indigenous groups. the social contract is not working. And an issue of that is that people see that they are not being included in this new society. And this is a bomb that is going to blow up when the new jobs arrive, the AI jobs arrive, and we don't have people prepared for those jobs. And those jobs are going to be moving to Asia or Europe or the US or places where we have the people to do that. And the gaps between the haves and the have-nots will be growing and growing. And then a social bomb is going to blow up. And what we are talking about here is that what it is really at stake, if we don't close these gaps urgently, is democracy and capitalism. And this is what we are already seeing in Latin America. This is what we saw last Sunday in Chile. People do want a new world, and they want to be included in that new world. And you see the numbers, the gaps are growing and growing and growing. So we have a big challenge. We have a huge challenge. We have to close all the gaps. But for me, the priority is education. Big time changing education systems. And you know what the main bottleneck of changing education is? Regulation. Regulation, and I'm sure that Sumitra and Lourdes know this perfectly. Regulatory systems of higher education were designed for hundreds of years ago. So universities cannot transform as fast as they want because there is a lot of constraints in terms of regulation. But this is urgent. And you know what really concerns me the most? That political leaders haven't understood this. They do not understand this new world. And actually today in Latin America, with perhaps the example, perhaps a section of Uruguay and a little bit of Chile, but the rest of the countries are not, or the leaders, the political leaders do not understand these new challenges. I mean, you take, for example, Mexico. Instead of moving up in the scale of in the importance, the political importance of technology, they eliminate the only secretary that was the secretary of telecommunication that was dealing with technology. Instead of moving them up, they just eliminate it, and it is happening all over the region. And what if we don't close this, and then the new jobs come, the social impact of this is going to be dramatic. So I hope we can all create movements so that we close this gap soon.
Thank you, Diego. Thank you so much for that. And it's interesting to hear you saying that and connecting that to leadership and governance. I think some very similar comments, I heard them yesterday in our North America Spotlight event, because has countries like Brazil, for example, and US and a lot of countries in the world right now. It's amazing that we are in 2020 and some countries like a broadband plan, for example, right? Or national strategies like you were mentioning, in that really deal with this problem in a holistic stacks way, right? From all dealing with all the pillars that we try, for example, to identify at the NRI, that the Rowan principles from UNESCO that I'm sure Lidia is going to mention later also deal with. So, okay, thank you so much. So moving to Sebastian. Hola, Sebastian. In recent years, and particularly during this COVID-19 crisis, we have witnessed ICT policies move from the sidelines to the core of national policy discussion, even if they are not as advanced as Diego and I and all of us would wish. So why should ICTs be at the core of policy? How can centering ICT development help COVID recovery plans in the region?
Okay, thanks so much. Carmen, and actually for the organizer for the invitation to ECLAC, and it's really a pleasure to be here to share some of our thoughts and also to learn about what you have been doing also at your institution, since I think it is very important and very useful also for what you're doing in Portland. Can you hear me well? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little. We are getting a little feedback
now.
Yeah.
Actually, okay. Very interesting your question, and I think it's something that for sure this must be considered in our region. Is that where we're thinking about the impact of the potential impact of digital technology and digitalization to face the COVID-19 crisis effect. Something that is very important. It is true that the ICT and digitalization could help our countries in facing this crisis. This is some of the solutions that already have been pointed out by Diego and also Alexandre and Lourdes. Also, for example, the distance learning, e-health, telework, e-commerce, and e-governments are some of the digital solutions that actually could help our countries in reducing the impact of containment measures. But something that there must be considered that we should not forget about that is about some structural limitation that we have in our countries. It is true that it's very, the teleworking and the distant learning have a very a potential impact in reducing this impact of COVID-19. But we should be very clear about this structural limitation that we still have in our countries related for example, with the access and connectivity is very fragmented by income and social levels. And this is something that must be included and considered when we are defining and we are thinking about different policy and instruments, to foster and to facilitate the access to this technology. It is true that, as Diego said, that 67% of our population have the access or use internet. But when you enter a little deeper, consider the different level of income, they have a huge gap between the population that's in the last quintile. So this is something that must be considered from the beginning when you are thinking of different instruments and policies that to foster and to facilitate this access to this technology. Also, the insufficient network speed. It is very difficult in our country. If you live in a home that at the same time you have 3 kids that must be connected at distance to the education, and you are using for telework. This when your work allows you to use this teleworking, and for example, this is something very different in between Europe and United States with Latin America, for example, while in Europe and US, even though more or less 40% of workers have actually could do the teleworking, could actually use this instrument, by teleworking. In Latin America, we are just 21%, and with huge difference between different countries. For example, in Uruguay is about 29%. There are other countries, for example, Dominican Republic, that is less 10%. So everything okay with teleworking, but be careful, because this is very related to your structure, your productive structure, the services that you offer at where you're working. It's not transversal, it's not equal to everyone. Also, the gap in development on digital skills. This is something very, very important that is actually have a lot of implication, the possibility to use this instrument, to help you in your development and access to income. And the last point, I think is one of the last point that Diego also raised up, is related to our production process with other productivity. and we have a weak digitalization in our production process. And this is something very, very important, you know, because you don't need just to think about an IoT plan to support and to you know, to support some of the enterprise sector. You also need to consider which are the main another base policy, you know, to support also small and medium enterprises, also to help them to access this technology to actually change the possibility to introduce in another market and this kind of thing. Especially when you are considering what happened with this COVID-19, is that many enterprises that were not connected, actually one day, from one day to other, they identified a situation that actually they couldn't access to the market, they couldn't give you know, their purchase to the product that they sell and they offer. So this is very important. That also we must consider all these events. Do not to what could happen is that actually the not access to ICT and this also these other structural limitations actually deepening inequalities and vulnerability within Latin America. And this is something that's very, very important. And actually what the COVID-19 actually brings to the region is the necessity and actually call for a new action. It is true that in many Latin American countries we have digital agenda, but today, behind this real new situation, I think actually we should start thinking of a new digital transformation plans. Digital transformation plans that also includes infrastructure, include health, education, include structure, include sector, particular sector, include agri-industry, industry, many others, and also absolutely government.
Thank you so much, Sebastian, and sorry for interrupting you. Yeah, and I couldn't agree less. I see one of our partners in another project is CNI in Brazil, the Confederation of National Industries, and one of their core agenda topics is exactly ICT access and transformation. So innovation hubs, for example, can be installed across Brazil, right? That's so crucial to prove that we need ICT so the country gets more competitive. I'm sorry I talk so much about Brazil. I'm originally from Brazil, so that's the country I know better. And it's a country where I worked a lot on open educational resources over a decade. And it was amazing to me when we visited schools to train teachers. The school officially had a certain speed, right? That was something else you were talking about. But then you would put the little tools that measure the speed at the school, and it was completely something else. You could not do really what the schools needed to do. So, so that I think it joins the need of holistic policy, but also good data, as Alexandre was saying, and COVID puts an emergency to all of that. So thank you so much for your contribution. So Lidia, my dear partner at UNESCO. So what is needed to ensure that no one is left behind, right? This is what we are talking a little bit until now, and all can harness benefits of this digital transformation. This is so crucial right now.
Thank you very much, Carol, and thank you also to all the previous speakers, because you made my work easier to answer this complex and multidimensional question. And I would start with where Sebastian stopped. And when Sebastian was talking about the digital transformation and about public policies. And that has to be linked to the first pillar that we defend in UNESCO, is that we need really inclusive digital economies and societies. But that means that digital policies, they have to be part of development policies. They have to be integrated with education policies, with higher education policies, with scientific and access to scientific knowledge policies, with economy, with industry. And we have to realize that this point looks cliche, but is the truth, because we are living in a region where inequalities is one of the major challenges we face, and COVID has put that right in front of us with all the multidimensionality of those inequalities. And so we do need to think and act in order to include really the ones that are left behind today. And that means to look at marginal groups. In Latin America, we can speak about indigenous people. We can speak about women. We can speak about, vulnerable groups that are left out of public policies, including education policies, health policies, and so on. So the first principle that we defend is that let's bring all the actors and make sure that as we think of that future society, we see all the faces and all the needs of these different groups, and even be bold enough to say that we need to prioritize these marginalized communities in order to give them a chance to develop. And that brings me to the second pillar that also was mentioned here, that is, how do we develop human capacity and institutional capacity? And I couldn't agree more that it's not enough to train teachers if the school system is not ready to address e-learning or a digital transformation. And of course, for us, that means that it's not just giving skills how to use a computer or to connect, how to use a platform, but it's really giving skills and knowledge to empower these people to co-create solutions using digital technology. And that's a huge shift. We wait, from the big countries to send us the technologies, the solutions to our own problems. But no, we need to be able to co-create solutions in the digital world, solutions to our issues. And this is also true for decision makers. I think Diego said we are not prepared politically to also address some of these challenges. And that's because maybe we have not created a space for learning for policymakers, how these technologies can be used for transformation. I would also like to address the issue that Alexandra, inside this idea of capacity, is the access to knowledge and access to data. And scientific knowledge today saves lives. We know that science saves lives, and part of that capacity is access that data, but also understanding what is data is telling us and base our decisions on that. The third pillar is clearly human rights, and I think that's what we have been talking about when we talk about no access to good education, to information, and so on. This is an agenda that has to be based on human rights and human agency. We really need to ensure, and you talked about our internet universality framework, the ROM indicators, and precisely UNESCO developed these indicators, and thanks Carolina for contributing to that, really to make sure that the universality of internet is based on human rights. It's really open, it's accessible, and is multi-stakeholder. Many of you, Lourdes, Diego, you talked about the importance of multi-stakeholders in this dialogue and in this debate. And I think we do need to do that, and that's why we include that. Also, the trust, security, and stability. We are not talking about that, but that is a big issue. And it's becoming even bigger with this pandemic, with all the apps that tells everybody where you are and with whom you are. And this also implies that we need to make sure that we bring ethical principles also to this digital transformation, and society is part of this dialogue, and is part of participates in this endeavor, and say this is how far we can go, and we have to protect some of these issues. And finally, something that your report promotes is the importance of digital cooperation. we cannot do alone. I mean, the challenges we are facing, we cannot do alone. And I would say that is cooperation all the way. It's not from north to south, south, north. It's all of us collaborating, trying to share good practices, trying to find ways to really, with the resources we have, with the challenges we have, that we are sure that we can ensure really that no one is left behind, and that everyone can earn the benefits of digital transformation. We really must ensure, and I think that's my final message here in this first round, is that our digital future, it has to be co-created in full respect of human rights, and where everyone can participate in that co-creation, because it's our future and it's our responsibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lidia. That was very inspiring, and I always love to hear people bringing up the idea of cooperation and co-creation. And I see lots of names of attendees joining us now, that actually people that I have worked in the past on things like Creative Commons and open science and access to public funded research. And I think that's such a crucial idea, to move from the idea of us as consumers to us as co-creators and entrepreneurs, right? If this mindset doesn't change, it's very hard to create and sometimes even really absorb the benefits or create the benefits that digital transformation brings to us. So I just want to thank you for bringing these issues, including the trust and security. We see the numbers of cybersecurity problems and attacks growing incredibly during COVID. So, you know, the network effects of the internet create good, but create bad, right? So I hope that the good prevails if we all co-create, as you were mentioning. So thank you again. So Professor Lourdes, coming back to you. So the way we live, learn, and work is now unrecognizable. I'm here in this room. My son is just after the glass window there, singing in his class or something else that he's doing there. I don't know if he's paying attention to his teacher though. And this time last year, webinars such as these were incredibly rare, right? So while this digital changes excitement of us, many of us in this network, they also threaten to exclude individuals and communities without the digital literacy and skills required to stay connected. Even here in the US, if you drive around, if you dare leave your house, you actually see kids is a very strong image sitting around places like a Taco Bell or a Starbucks, trying to connect to take their classes, right? Here, even in Maryland, the government had to distribute computers to kids because they didn't have, and it's a very rich area of the US, right? So imagine in Latin America. So what is the impact the pandemic has had or should have on reskilling, upskilling? And how could this deepen or alleviate the digital divide?
Actually, there are many NGOs all over Latin America that are looking at closing this gap. I remember visiting favelas in Sao Paulo, but could be anywhere in the world where you had centers with complete availability of laptops and desktops for children, for everybody. And I assume that during the pandemic, with the proper social distance, these centers are very useful for students who have neither internet access nor laptops at home to continue their education. I remember again going to former Minister Diego Molano, whose principal motto was Vive Digital, live digitally. So again, was saying, why not in Colombia, with the image that Colombia has had in the past, we move to becoming developers of apps. And again, in Colombia, there is a very interesting project by one global shaper from the World Economic Forum to go to these shanty towns that they are so prevalent, unfortunately, in the whole region, and start telling the high school students, you need to learn to program, because there are jobs in programming all over. So this student, this young person, Juan David Aristizabal, again, and it's not only Colombia, it's everywhere that we see these initiatives. We need more of that. We need also governments celebrating and extending this, what is becoming sometimes anecdotal, to become measure all over the country, in rural areas, again, in most difficult areas where the internet access or the ownership of laptops is less, to make this possible. Let's remember that mobile penetration is huge in Latin America. Is more than 100, much more than 100% all over the region. I remember I participated in the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Women, that the idea was to train women entrepreneurs. And we were using smartphones. Every single woman with any micro enterprise has a smartphone. So use also, let's remember, this is a tremendous digital device that can facilitate very much the access. Let's think that besides laptops that are sometimes more difficult to get, we have the smartphones, and the smartphones have connectivity. So let's adjust our new apps to this tool that is so prevalent in Latin America, and definitely that's a possibility. And even teenagers are having smartphones. So let's use this as a tool, not only for accessing social media, but for education and telemedicine, that is very important.
Thank you, Lourdes. And I always remember a report, I think from the World Bank or OECD, the Digital Dividends report from 2016. One of the things that really stayed with me in that report is how more impactful is to connect a woman than a man. Sorry, my male panelists. It seems, based on data, that when a woman is connected, the benefit goes to the community much more than when a man is connected, right? And of course, we have to connect all, but it was very interesting to see, and how important are all those initiatives to connect women around the world, right? For various reasons in societies that are more oppressive than US or Brazil or Argentina, women are less connected. There is a gender divide that is incredible, and it's actually increasing if you see some data from the Alliance for Affordable Internet. So we should really pay attention to that. Another thing that is very interesting to see is some, actually, from colleagues of mine from the YGL program at the WEF, connecting refugee camps. It's very incredible how much entrepreneurship comes from those camps if you give a cell phone. So I thank you, Lourdes, for bringing some of those examples up, so we don't leave anybody behind, doesn't matter the conditions they are facing at the time. So Sumitra, I want to come to you and then to Alexandre. So the pandemic has radically altered the digital landscape in Latin America on an individual, firm, and government level, or is pressuring into that direction. New barriers to digital transformation have emerged, and old barriers have been torn down. Before the pandemic, what were the main barriers to Latin America tech competitiveness, and have these barriers changed? And you are welcome to also bring elements from the Global Innovation Index that you helped launch some time ago.
Yeah, thank you, Carolina, and I must thank my panel members for the many excellent comments. You know, all of you are experts in the region. Many of you live in the region. You know the region much better than I do. But I have traveled to the region quite a bit, and in some sense, I have some feel for the challenges and opportunities in the region. You know, just listening to the discussion that you just had, what strikes, I think, me, and I think strikes everyone probably, is even though we are talking about technology, how most of the discussion has around people, leadership, regulation, other kinds of human issues. So you automatically start seeing that the key issues around technology adoption, technology leverage today are not necessarily technology alone. Clearly, technology is an issue. We need access to the right technology. I'm not denying that. But the bigger challenges are around the organizational, around the people, around the human-centric, around the political, regulatory aspects. And the good news out there is that if the leadership is there on the ground, those solutions can be engineered locally. You know, Minister Molano, when he was minister in Colombia, you know, what he did was remarkable. And that was done primarily from an inside-driven approach, you know, trying to leverage the talent and trying to leverage the unique context of Colombia to create a center of excellence in technology out there. So I do believe that a lot of good can happen with technology today by proper integration, proper partnership, proper leadership in the region. So that's the first point that I wanted to make. Having said that, I do worry about the region. And by the way, it's not Latin America alone. I worry about parts of Africa, even Europe, in that today global leadership in the economy is defined by technology leadership in most areas. And that's one reason why you see the US, you know, even the US is now extremely concerned about this global leadership position because it sees China as a real, viable, credible threat to technology leadership. And I would argue, you know, it's not just the political system. China has had its unique political system for several decades. The US has woken up to it right now because China has caught up in technology. And China has basically changed or is threatening to change potentially the rules of economic competitiveness, economic leadership. Now, if you look at the top 20 digital companies in the world, approximately half of them are American and half of them are Chinese. Okay, there's not a single one from Latin America, not a single one from Africa, and not a single one, in fact, from India or even from Europe. And that's the reason I say I worry about these countries too. So if you look at the future, just project yourself 10, 20 years down the road, and all of us, we know that, you know, it's a common statement now, we're living in exponential times. And we often think of exponential times as a nice thing to talk about. But if you just put some numbers on what we mean by it, if you just take a linear series, you know, and just say you add 1 every year to a certain amount. So let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, go 30 steps, 30 years, and you hit the number 30. You go an exponential series, 2 to the power of 1, 2 to the power of 2, 2 to the power of 3, and you go 30 times, 30 years, 2 to the power of 30 is a billion. So that's the difference between linear and exponential, 30 versus a billion. And that really reflects today we are in the technological progress dimension in the hockey stick curve, where the speed of progress really is exponential. And if every year, in some sense, the exponential growth is creating so many more opportunities, and if only some countries are able to leverage the opportunities, the question is what happens to the rest? So I think leaving aside the issue of inequality and general poverty alleviation and trying to do the best society right now, I also worry about global leadership. You know, will Latin American companies be able to shape the industries in any reasonable, meaningful way in the future? Or will they have to essentially play by the rules set by American and Chinese companies? As, by the way, is happening already in many sectors right now. So this is not a far-fetched scenario. This is quite real right now. And so I think in the region, there has to be a very strong, determined push towards investing in technology. And this, of course, has to be complemented by all the organizational change, but the technology investment itself is very critical. Because, you know, I remember talking to Minister Furlan in many years ago in the administration of President Lula. And, you know, that time there was, I'm talking about 15 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, software was not even a part of Brazil's industrial policy. Brazil's industrial policy was focused on manufacturing. Not that manufacturing is bad, but manufacturing will today is becoming also fully automated. Technology is becoming a part of that completely. Software is the future in many ways. So I think the area has not invested enough in core technologies, and that is going to potentially harm the area in the future. So I think technology needs to become a core driver. And even some of the leading names in software services today, you have Softec, you have Totus, you have Stefanini, and you have other companies. They are very good companies. They are strong companies, but they're not global leaders like Tencent, like Alibaba, like Amazon. This is what these companies will define the future. So the big issue that is there also is, in the future, what kind of role will the Latin American companies play? Will they be leaders, or will they basically be rule followers? So I think that's an important question also to put on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sumitra, for that. So we are, just for the attendance benefits, we are a little behind in the program. We're just gonna have more 3 comments from our panelists, and then we're gonna move forward with the Network Readiness Index presentation with the highlights for the region. So I hope you all can stay with us. So Alexandre, what digital divides are you most worried about in Brazil or in the region? What is the data telling you, and which groups are online or offline right now?
Thank you, Carol. I just wanted to make a connection to what our former Minister Diego Molano has mentioned about business not being transformed. I couldn't agree more, because the fact that, for instance, in Brazil, our ICT business survey shows that small, medium, and large enterprises, they are fully connected with broadband. But what they are doing with this broadband, so it's very instrumental. And if you see the innovation index that we have for countries globally, Brazil is not innovating at all, or very little, I would say. So this is very clear in our data. And I also remember one publication that I don't know if the name is correct, from CEPAL, that they said we have to move from internet of consumption to internet of production, or industrial internet. So we are doing well in terms of using the internet to buy things and to get information, but how these technologies and how internet technology is really being used to transform business and society. So in Brazil, Carol, we still have a significant proportion of the population not yet participating and benefiting of this digital transformation process. There is a clear distance between the potential of the digital technologies and the practical realization of their benefits. So we all know that the challenge of the digital inclusion are not new and is still not solved. So especially in Brazil, in many countries in the region, low-income households, for instance, or people living in remote and rural areas are the most excluded part of the population in our countries. And again, in Brazil, we have, I would say, 2 main barriers that stand between the benefits of the digital and the poorest and most vulnerable population. One is the internet access gap, and the other is the digital skill gap. Mr. Molina has already mentioned very beautifully the role of education. And of course, that broadband connectivity is the first step to bridge the access gap. Many countries in the region, you can see, and CEPAL probably knows that, have invested heavily in the development of broadband infrastructure as a strategy to boost growth dynamics and to reduce inequality. But what happened? These investments have not always been followed by effective policies necessary to promote real impacts on development and well-being. Then we have the digital skills gaps, which is more complex to be eliminated. This gap, as you know, is inseparable from the gap in access to quality education. And here, we really have a huge problem, not only in Brazil, but in many countries in the region. We could stay here forever talking about how education relates or correlates to skills and the digital transformation. So in this way, it is extremely important that digital transformation actions place the development of people at the very center of this debate, considering that we need to reduce the enormous gap between expectation on the transformation potential of the digital technologies and their effective contribution to development in general and to reduce inequalities in particular. So here at Cetic, we have really very large database of hundreds of indicators disaggregated by many socioeconomic variables. And we could tell many stories from this data, but those stories related to access and digital skills gaps are the ones that better portray our challenge to realize the full potential of the digital transformation. So I think that this is my main two stories that I can take out from the data. Thank you, Carolina.
Thank you, Alexandre. That was it's a great commentary, and I think one of the main things, especially when dealing with regulators and politicians, is how can we bring the stories, like you're saying, behind the data, right? That's what brings people together and really bring even their empathy to the table, right? So they bring faces to the problem. So I'm not getting any commissions with these guys, but I really want to share the two books that actually deal a lot with what Alexandre and Diego and our colleagues have talking about. So once you see, Lourdes, I have your book here. So it's the Era of Chinese Multinationals Competing for Global Dominance. You still need to sign it for me though. But it talks a lot about digital transformation in companies and exactly what Sumitra was saying of Chinese companies leading in a lot of cases. And another one that I love from a friend of mine from Harvard, Professor Karim Lakhani, is Competing in the Digital Age of Artificial Intelligence. As you see, I destroy my books when I read them. And it really talks about putting technology and AI at the core of the company, which goes beyond using technology to help with your logistics or send emails internally, right? It really incorporates technology, and that technology helps the companies to be more innovative and even more competitive in the fourth industrial revolution. So for those who are watching us, just little sharing on what you can do on your weekend, reading some books. So coming back to books dealing with the company issues our panelists were talking about. So coming back, so Sebastian, in the past few months, we've seen that countries with strong digital infrastructure and good governance are well equipped to fight the pandemic. We actually published some time ago a post analyzing what Costa Rica was doing. Costa Rica, unfortunately, is losing a little bit on the fight of COVID right now, but was doing really well in the beginning. So why digital infrastructure is so important?
Thanks so much, Carolina, for the question. I think, for us, the digital infrastructure, is the first step that you need to actually to have access to this, the huge opportunity that brings you this digital or this technology. So actually, even though if as Alexandre has been talk about, if you analyze some indicators, even though it seems that you have reduced this gap, actually not just between countries but within countries, it seems something that it seems to be reduced. The gap to access or the infrastructure, actually there are new gaps for example, when you enter in the important that is going to have the access to 5G, this is something for sure it's coming in the next year, and not just in the next year, in the next month. It's also very, very important if you want to develop IoT, artificial intelligence, and many others that you can develop around these. So this is some of the first issue that has been that must be solved, and actually has not been. Actually, it's not solved in all our Latin American and Caribbean countries. For example, we have analyzed how much should be invested to actually to reduce or to eliminate the access gap. And actually, we estimate that Latin American and Caribbean countries should invest 1% of the GDP in a basic digital basket to guarantee access to all Latin American and Caribbean population, citizens. This is something for sure is very different, for example, from Bolivia to Chile, because in Chile there are this is something that maybe has been already solved, but in Bolivia this is a huge effort that it's not just about government. Also, that is something, even though we are estimated about it's about 1% of the GDP, this could be invested. It's not implied that it must come from the public sector. This is something that could also be from the private sector. This is a very interesting experience in in Peru, that have been implementing a project that involved Microsoft and Facebook, to give this access to this population. At the same time, so the first element that you have to solve is the access, and I have quality access. The second element is very related to what Alexandre says, in the digital skill, that is something much more complex, and then comes all the other elements. One aspect that I will also I would like to raise up is this is some of the line action or action plan that should be considered, including in Latin American and Caribbean countries. First is universalize the access for this inclusive digital society. This is the first step. Then you should, for sure, promote the productive transformation that include actually improve or encourage the use of digital technology, not just in the small and medium enterprises, but also the digitalization of the supply chain, innovation and strengthening of the digital ecosystem, for sure. Third, promote a trust and digital security. This is something I think you talk about, and also Lidia raised the point, and this is very, very important. The cybersecurity, the privacy, and this is very related to access to data and information. And also, or even though the data would be useful actually to identify and to better define which are the main instruments and the policy, you must be clear about the data that you are collecting, or the access that you have, the information that you have of this data actually include the whole society, even though otherwise you are going to define instrument and data actually policy that is focused or is directed to the to some part of the population, and this could imply polarize your society. Then the last point is related to the importance of this new governance model for a digital welfare state, that it must be, for sure, equality and economy and social rights and labor rights should be included in this agenda. And last, finally, the importance of regional digital cooperation, as Lidia has been saying about.
Thank you so much, Sebastian, for that. And just moving to Diego, last but not least, and then we're going to move to the NRI presentation. So Diego, any hope for the next few years, and what are the core digital challenges that you see facing, so we can ensure we are building forward better, which is one of the core messages of our events, is like we want to build forward better. So just your last comments, Diego. You're on mute. Estás? Udo.
Sorry. So I'm very concerned about the challenges we face now, but I have hope. A hope on people, hope on young people. When you ask young Latin Americans, what do they foresee their professional future? What they want to do as a career? Today, almost 65% in average say, I want to be an entrepreneur. You know, when I grew up, 65% or even more than that, including me, I wanted to work in a big corporation and be an employee the rest of my life. Now, young people, they want to change the world, they want to create jobs. And if you see entrepreneurship in the region is really, really growing dramatically. If you take out SoftBank investments, because SoftBank was just a one-time kind of show for last year, if you take out the SoftBank money of last year, this year we have had more venture capital money in the region than ever before. That's good news. The number of unicorns is growing in the region, but unicorns are kind of a special types of startups. But if you see the number of companies valuated around $10 million in most of the countries, the number of companies is growing dramatically. And for example, in the fintech world, you know, it happens all over the region, but let me show you the numbers of Colombia. In Colombia in 2015, just 35% of people, of adults, had access to a bank account. Today, 83%. So we went from 35 to 83% of banking penetration, thanks to the transformation of the whole financial sector, which includes, of course, the transformation of traditional banks, but also the fintech world, the new startups that are working on that. If you see the growth of the edtech world, the technology for education, with solutions applied to the base of the pyramid, this is fantastic. If you see the food and tech sector in the region, it is amazing what it is happening there. So I am very, very, very positive that young people are going to take the lead and are going to transform the region, because it is basically what they want to do in terms of what they, how they envision the world. And I think the future of Latin America is about entrepreneurship, and it is about young people taking the lead. Thank you.
Thank you, Diego, so much. And that's so true, right? So you see so much the spread of co-working spaces in Latin America, and even companies like Facebook that was mentioned before, opening entrepreneurial spaces in Latin America, but also in Africa, for example. Okay, so without delay, Sumitra, could I please give you the floor to present the NRI highlights for the region, and then the panelists will have the opportunity to respond to those. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just give me a couple of seconds to share my screen, please.
And I just want to acknowledge the attendees' questions. We have 2 or 3 questions, and we're going to pose those after the presentation. Sumitra, you are ready to go.
Thank you so much. And I'll try to be brief in my comments, because many of the comments have been already raised, I think, substantial issues. I would like to, of course, remind everyone that this report was released just a few days ago. There is a website called the Network Readiness Index.org, and you can download the report, download the data, and see all the details. And I'd also like to acknowledge the support of our partner, Sterlite Technologies. Now, there are 4 sort of elements I wanted to include in the presentation. The first one is, what is the NRI? Second, briefly talk about the rankings from this year. Third, talk about digital transformation, because this is a theme for the NRI report this year. It's also a theme for our panel, and it's something which is very topical in many organizations, I think, all over the world. And finally, close with some key messages where I'm sure you'll find resonance with what was spoken about earlier. So just to give you some little history about the Network Readiness Index. Over the last 20 years, there have been two global indices that have been so-called widely quoted and widely used. The one has been the Information Technology Union's ITU, Telecommunication Union's ITU's Technology Index. And the second one was the World Economic Forum's Network Readiness Index. So my colleague, Dr. Bruno Lanois, myself, we were co-authors of the Network Readiness Index, which was created at the World Economic Forum in 2002 and published as part of the report called the Global Information Technology Report till 2016. Now, if I had to just broadly contrast the difference between the Network Readiness Index, NRI, and the ITU Index, the ITU Index was and has been traditionally very much focused on the technology side, the infrastructure, the bits and bytes, and all very important elements of the technology infrastructure. The NRI, from its very start, was focused on looking at the usage of technology and how technology was impacting development, impacting competitiveness of societies, of nations. Now, in 2002 itself, I think looking back, we were quite forward-looking in including elements of society which perhaps were not necessarily seen as that important for technology back in 2000, 20 years ago. And we were probably amongst the first that explicitly included elements of regulation or the political environment, of societal issues in terms of trying to frame how well will technology be used in a society for its competitiveness. Over the next 20 years, 15 years, the NRI index was used extensively by many governments around the world, including in Latin America, to frame their technology policies. And in 2018, when the NRI index moved to Portulans, we sort of took some time to rethink the index and ask the question, the index was very successful for many years, but is it really future ready for the future? And what we went through was a rethinking of the model. And the rethinking of the model was very important because that really reflects, in some sense, the core challenge ahead of us in technology. And this is something that has come up repeatedly in the discussions too. The future of technology in our lives, in corporations, relies much more on our ability to successfully integrate the human dimension of technology. For that, you need the right governance, and of course, you need to have the right kind of impacts on economy, on society, quality of life, on the environment, SDG goals, and so on. So what we have done really in this reframed, rethought, or reimagined NRI is brought in issues which we think really are reflective of the technology agenda for nation societies in the next 5-10 years. Issues like trust, regulation, inclusion, environmental goals, and so on, which were never explicitly emphasized so much in the previous model of NRI, or are not really included explicitly in most other models, including the ITU model, which, as I said earlier, is mainly focused correctly or so on technology issues. So that is really the model, and we believe is something unique and something very useful for organizations and for countries as they look forward. Now, if you look at the rankings, we of course have rankings based on indicators and so on. I must emphasize that every ranking is incomplete and in some ways not completely accurate. Why? Because you cannot capture all these different dimensions completely accurately. Some of the dimensions itself are fuzzy. For example, issues like trust, issues like inclusion, how do you measure them? The challenge becomes even more critical if you think about measuring them for 134 countries. you might have much better data associated with OECD countries or any one country in particular, but trying to find a common data set across 130 countries is extremely complicated. So it's a very complex process. And somehow there are lots of holes in that process, but nevertheless, collectively, that data does give us some useful big picture snapshot of how the world of technology competitiveness as measured with NRI looks like. Now, in this ranking, you have some of the usual players that you know of, many Scandinavian countries, of Singapore, US, and these countries sort of tend to be usually the high income economies. And that is something that we have seen over the years, is that there is a fairly high correlation between high income economies and success in NRI. Now, the causality out there is very difficult to actually fully disentangle, because it might be that rich countries, for example, invest more in technology, or if you invest more in technology, you create more wealth. But there is some kind of association out there, which is very, in fact, quite striking and persistent. Now, as I told you, the model itself has a lot of data, 134 countries, 60 different variables, and 4 different dimensions. And I could spend a lot of time talking about different kinds of ways you can slice and dice the data. I will not do so. I will just give you some very high-level sort of indicators. Now, on the 4 pillars, we have technology, we have people, governance, and impact. You can see countries that are doing better in those. And you can also see countries that are not doing as equally well. They're not listed out here, but in the report, they are there. So in some sense, they provide us some kind of motivation, some kind of indication about what can we learn from these companies, countries. So why is Denmark doing better on the people dimension? Why is Finland, Korea doing better on people dimension? Now, why is Norway doing better on governance? So we can try to actually go a little bit more in depth. And that's one reason why in the report each year, we try to combine the quantitative data-based component with a qualitative interview-based or case study-based kind of information. And this year, we have done the same, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, we can, of course, have different ways to look at the rankings. The previous ranking was overall. Now, here you have the rankings by income group. Now, some countries might be quite obvious and you might agree with them. Some other countries might be surprising to you. For example, Rwanda in the low income group, or Moldova in the low middle income group, or Bulgaria in the upper middle income group. And as I said, once again, they are good data points to encourage thinking into why are some countries leading and why are some other countries not doing equally well, or what can we learn from each other. Now, the same kind of analysis can be done by region. And out here, what you see is, as a region, Africa, of course, is lagging. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done in Africa. And we'll discuss this in African launch in a few days' time. In the Americas, of course, looking at both North and South America, the US and Canada lead. And then Uruguay comes in at the 3rd position out there. Now, talking about Latin America more in depth, what you find is that Latin American population sample out here is 16 countries and 3 countries from the Caribbean. And of course, there's a spread across high income economies and 12 upper middle income economies and 3 lower middle income economies, none low income economies. And the ranks range from 47th to 108th. Now, on the right-hand side, what you see is a rough sort of dispersion of ranks, and like the median rank out there for that sample. And what you see is, on the whole, the Americas, which is excluding Canada and US, so it's really Latin America largely, what you see is they're all fairly relatively closely clustered. And at the same time, the performance on the whole is below that of many other parts of the world, leaving aside Africa. So there is room for improvement out here. Now, if you look at the performance Latin America by pillar, you see also an interesting trend. So you see, in some sense, the strengths in relative terms, these are all relative terms, is governance and impact. But the weakness is also technology and people. And this comes back to the point raised earlier about how Latin American organizations and businesses need to invest and become more digital intensive and use technology much more actively inside their own business processes. Now, coming to the third part of this presentation, I mentioned that each time we take some effort to complement the data with some interviews and case studies. This year it was in digital transformation, and we had the privilege of interviewing many global thought leaders and government experts and other innovators. And these interviews are all documented on the website of the Portulans Institute. So we encourage you to look at the website and actually look at some of the qualitative feedback that these great colleagues have given on digital transformation. And what we have seen is, as a society, we have to think about, of course, many questions, but three key questions. The first question about the impact of digital transformation on global inequality. This issue of inequality has come up multiple times already in the presentations. And I think this is something which is extremely important because, the data so far shows two things. So one is that the inequality in the world is actually quite large, and in some parts of the world is increasing. And second, digital technologies actually might be increasing this inequality in many parts of the world. Why do I say that? Simply because, in very simple language, the richer economies or richer people have usually higher skills, access to more resources, access to better networks, and better technology. And the combination of that, they're able to create wealth at a faster rate than, let's say, poor economies or poorer people who have skills, some skills, not the same skills, some resources, not the same resources, and some technology, not the same technology as the rich economies or rich people. And thus they create value, but less value. So in some sense, this kind of a diversion is something that you see not just across economies, but also inside a country between the rural and the urban areas. And this is something of worrying, of some worry in the future. The second and third questions out here are very much linked to the core of how technology is affecting our lives. And here you start touching upon issues like security and trust and control, and the kind of jobs that are being created. Yes, for example, leading tech companies are creating a lot of jobs today, but a lot of the jobs are sometimes gig worker type of jobs, leading to, it doesn't necessarily give you living wage salaries in many countries. And at the same time, often I hear from many people, sometimes medical doctors, I teach a program for medical doctors at Cornell, and they complain about how technology is controlling their life as a doctor, how much time they're spending treating patients and seeing every single case and so on and so forth. So there's a whole question around how is technology being integrated into our lives? Is it actually empowering people or controlling people? Is it actually improving our lives or actually making our lives a little bit more difficult? And these kinds of questions have to be addressed. For example, one of our colleagues from Harvard Business School, Shoshana Zuboff, has written a book on surveillance capitalism, of how, for example, many tech companies build the business models by preying on the private customer data and private customer sort of behaviors of people. And if you talk about the lack of trust caused by AI and fakes and other kinds of problems seen in the media today, some of the basic questions are being raised about, is governance through democracy even feasible in the future? And if you start questioning some of these basic elements, that starts raising some very fundamental issues around how digital transformation is affecting our lives. So my last slide really is about this, some key messages. As I said, a lot of the key messages have been touched upon in the discussions already, but we have talked about how digital transformation needs to go beyond technology to the entire organization, entire economy, political regulation, everything else. We talked about digital divides and how these digital divides actually are not decreasing, despite the enlarged number of mobile phones and smartphones and so on. The actual digital divide, and this is more than inequality, just the digital divide itself is actually not decreasing. Trust and security are very important. The COVID crisis has certainly accelerated digital transformation, so you can see a major change in the years ahead. Education reskilling was talked about at depth in our previous discussions, very critical. And of course, the impact of transformation SDGs. Against one of our panel members talked about how technology can help achieve the SDG goals on health and on education by making it more accessible to many people around the world. And of course, for digital transformation to actually help, digital transformation can actually help build global cooperation and redefine globalization. And this is something required because today we are seeing some kind of diversion between at least the US and China on many aspects. So let me close out there. And I think I invite you once again to look at the networkreadinessindex.org, that website. And there you can download all the data and the report. So thank you very much for your attention, and over to you, Carolina.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Sumitra, for your presentation and for all those highlights and data. I think there is a clear confirmation of a lot of what our panelists brought and also what NIC, Cetic.Br have found over their years, specifically in regarding to Brazil. So, Alexandre, since I just mentioned NIC and Cetic, specifically about the Brazil piece of the highlights, what are the indicators or highlights that most excite you or worry you?
Well, Carolina, in terms of, I just wanted to mention that I completely agree with Sumitra that there is not such a perfect index, because when you put multiple dimensions in one single synthetic and composite indicators, of course, it is a very good thermometer to say what we are, but it's not the perfect one. When we look at the data, the Brazilian data, what worries me a little bit is the fact that we have a very large population using only mobile devices to access the internet. And this has very large implications, as our former Minister Molano has said, in terms of ICT skills development, digital skills development. If you look at the upper class, socioeconomic class and high-income households, they have multiple devices. They can navigate from different type of devices. And of course, this allows a more advanced and proficient use of these devices. So I'm really concerned with the future of Brazil in terms of innovation and the use of artificial intelligence, and how can we really make a governance of these new technologies such as artificial intelligence. We need proper skills, we need digital literacy, so that people, they can, as you know, the human right is being exercised more and more online. So how this online environment will allow really human rights to be exercised. So this is a concern. And also in terms of the business transformation in the country. And I think that the NRI shows this very, very clearly. What are the dimensions that Brazil is lagging behind? So what I like, this type of wide ranging assessment instrument like NRI with the multiple dimensions, is to see which are the gaps that we have. And we have advanced a lot in terms of connectivity. Most Brazilians are connected and are using the internet, but it's a very instrumental use. It's not a very sophisticated use. Even the companies and government. So this is something that I think that we have to bring to the political agenda, to political debate. This is more or less my main concerns. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ali. And Lourdes, some of your reactions, please.
I think that as following what Alexander just said, I believe that these pervasive smartphones that you have all over can be a very good tool, and I mentioned that in my remarks before, can be an excellent tool for the helping bridging the divide, because definitely otherwise if we have to wait for a broadband arriving to rural areas, is going to be much more difficult and will take much more time. Thank you.
Thank you, Lourdes. Yes, and I agree and hope so, right? In Brazil, the 5G spectrum bids and all that is moving. So hopefully that's going to support even more digital inclusion via mobile phones around the country, for example. Sebastian, in the age of globalization, we can view a country performance in isolation, right? So how, what are your comments and reactions, and how can we leverage the country's linkages in terms of cooperation to improve performance overall?
Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to congratulate you for this work. I think it's very useful, this index. Actually, more than this index, all the data that you have inside the index. You know, there are many interesting elements that for sure that we are going to use them in the next report that we are going to launch near in our regional meeting on ICT and digital economy that is going to be at the end of November. Related to that and related to the how to foster and why it's so important to foster cooperation and actually digital cooperation. Last, I think was in July, we launched a new report on digital transformation and how digital transformation could actually building back better Latin American and the Caribbean. This is something very important, but to do this and actually to go forward in this direction, something that it is very important in our region is to foster cooperation. To foster cooperation around something that we have launched, I think it was about 4 years ago, is the possibility to reinforce a digital regional market. You know, we have this experience in Europe, but something that is very difficult to find this something similar in Latin America and the Caribbean. So you don't have the enforcement, you don't have the same institution, but especially today, that where this is something that in the next year would be much more important, is how we reinforce commerce, how we will reinforce the interconnectivity of the relationship between our countries, actually how we invest together to support infrastructure to develop digital economy. So for sure we should not just explore, what we should support this sub-regional space, for example, in the Pacific Alliance or in the Mercosur. That is something that we should work much more harder in the next years, for sure.
Thank you, Sebastian, for that. Diego, can I get some of your final comments and reactions to the NRI?
Thank you. I think it is a good effort, a fantastic effort to put together the numbers to compare, and we have to take from it the good examples. We have to learn from other geographies. We have to assess what it is really valuable for our economies. And one thing that really is interesting is that in the past, it was just telecom infrastructure. So there are so many elements in the pipeline, like Lidia said. It's like you have to go from infrastructure to human rights and align the whole spectrum of issues: the use of technology, the platforms, skills, privacy, cybersecurity. even at the end, and human rights. But we either tackle this issue seriously, the close of these gaps, and urgently, and hopefully together, because then we have more economies of scale, which is part of the success of the new economy, or we are going to have a lot of social issues here. We are just starting to see the tip of the iceberg. But what it is behind is the new jobs. That's where the bomb is going to blow up, when we realize that we are not getting the jobs of this new economy. We are not getting prepared to do those jobs, and little by little, and you see in the pandemic, a huge trend towards teleworking or telecommuting or whatever, you know, and we were not ready. And this is just the first step. Then we are going to have what we call the algorithm jobs that are coming. And then that's where the income is going to be way, way different. So what we have today is what we are calling the Matthew effect. The Matthew effect. You know, the Matthew effect, which is from the Bible, from the parable of talents, that more will be given to the ones that already have, and the people who have or who have little, that will be removed. So why? Because now if somebody has access to the whole value chain, has way more opportunities to move in that exponential economy than people that lack one part of that value chain. And there are many areas that we have to work. We have to work in education. We have to work in including small companies, as Alexandre mentioned. Small companies are critical here. And the value chains are being transformed dramatically. Value chains are shortening now. And so we have to get ready about that. We have to transform the governments in three areas. Of course, they have to be more efficient using technology, but they also have to fight corruption using technology, which is one of the main problems of Latin America, is how with technology we fight corruption. And thirdly, how with technology we make countries more efficient through a better regulation of the economy. So we face a good challenge, but I'm very positive, very positive, that we are going to take advantage of the new tools we have to make Latin America a better place for the coming generations.
Thank you, Diego. And I couldn't agree more that we are facing potential increasing social unrests in Latin America and lots of other countries, and the economic crisis we are all facing, and the number of bankruptcies might increase that. And not just that, right, with COVID effects, health effects actually, like long COVID, we're gonna have a huge part of population with a lot of lingering issues that might complicate even more this equation. So, but how, Lidia, coming to you on that point, how can we actually build from efforts of cooperation and collaboration to try to better those results of the NRI for Latin America in the upcoming years?
Thank you very much, Carolina, and Sumitra, thank you and congratulations. I think it's a very interesting report. And I think it was Ale that said that, or Sebastian, that the complexity of the indicators is where the richness is finally in going probably in a much deeper analysis, and maybe building in what Sebastian said and Diego also. I think there are three major areas where regional cooperation is fundamental. One of them is in human capacity. This region doesn't have a lot of regional programs where capacity to train high-level, human capital is shared among the countries that have less. And I think it's a challenge for the regional organizations, but also for us, and I'm talking also to my dear friend Sebastian, that we do need to make a movement towards cooperation on higher education, on really building critical mass on these technologies, including the new technologies, and in particular, artificial intelligence. We are far behind, and we don't have a critical mass, basically. And that's probably a big difference with some countries in Asia, where they did that transformation much earlier, and therefore they are today able to bring this to transform industry, to transform economies, to transform societies. So that would be the first area I would really propose as an important area for cooperation. And that links to creation of knowledge. The infrastructure that we have for research in these technologies, it's also not homogeneous in the region. You have countries that have some capacity to do so, and you have countries that have no capacity at all. And I think we need, and we are defending open science, and part of open science, it's not only to share data and publications, but is to share human capital, to share infrastructure for research, to really start building capacity and new technologies coming from this region, much more adapt to the conditions that we are. The second area is related to policies. And I think, again, we need to have coherence in our policies, because many times we are negotiating with big companies. And if the countries have different policies in the acquisition, development, deployment, it's very hard to negotiate as a whole. And therefore, I think Sebastian talked about, or no, it was Diego, economies of scale. I think that's very important, and we need to and that has to be done at the policy level, not just ad hoc, but really in a policy level. And finally, I think that the other area that we need to share is the human rights approach to this. I mean, this region cannot lose that tradition. This is one of the most rich region culturally, with many languages, rich in biodiversity, rich in social movements and human rights fight. This richness of this region have to inspire, have to shape also the transformation, the digital transformation we want, not only for the region, but worldwide. There is a lot to be contributed in that aspect. And therefore, collaborating on that, on bringing that stamps that are so much from Latin America and from the culture of this, the cultures of this region, I think is important to really ensure inclusive digital transformation, where the voices of smaller countries, of countries that are, in a much more vulnerable position in relation to this transformation, can be heard. And the people that have no voices today in the internet on these technologies become not only visible, but also shaping those new technologies, and that's the digital transformation. Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Lidia, for those concluding thoughts and reactions. And when we talk about issues like privacy by design, ethics by design in AI, and so far and so on, I think that's exactly on point what you were mentioning, right? And going back to the idea of co-creation and innovation there. One of the actually measurements that we used in the NRI that we were able to include last year when we renewed was, for example, contributions to a platform like GitHub, right? And Wikipedia even, which demonstrates are proxies to demonstrate some issues around the skills and creation and so forth and so on. So thank you so much for that. And I want to make sure to invite all the attendants to also check online our digital transformation dialogue, which is a series of interviews that we have done with experts from around the world, including some of the panelists and internet pioneers like Vincent Cerf, Larry Arvin, who coined the term digital divide, and many other incredible names, including from Brazil and other Latin American countries. We have both videos and written interviews, and they are great to really give context to the NRI this year. So please check that. I just shared the link in the dialogue box. So Sumitra, can I give the floor to you to conclude our event today? And I wanna again thank Cetic.Br partnership and also UNESCO partnership for the event today. Sumitra.
So thank you very much, Carolina, for hosting it. Thank you to all our panel members, all our audience members joining us. Technology is critical for Latin America's future. I think we all agree on that. I would like to echo amongst the various things I heard, Minister Molano's comments about young people. I think how we should really be inspired by the young people. And I must say that I'm inspired by even listening to you, the leaders of Latin America in technology today. So collectively, I'm sure we will see great progress, and that's what I hope will happen. What I can offer from Portulans Institute is we are willing to be partners to you as you try to create various projects or other efforts inside your own countries or regions. And please to count upon us, and please to give us feedback about how the research is useful and what can be improved for the future. So thank you very much, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you for those who have sent questions to the Q&A. And thank you, the panelists who already have answered those questions. Any follow-ups, please email us at info@portulansinstitute.org. And if I may ask the panelists to smile for the camera. Just a second. Okay, I was not ready for that. Here you go. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Okay,
so much.
Thank you.
Have a
Bye.
good day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Nice to see you.